You've been discussing lately a bit on some of your channels about masculine and feminine, um, let's say, roles and crises of the masculine feminine dance, as well as the crisis of masculinity per se, the crisis of femininity per se. Do you care to expand on that a bit? I think we could probably take 3-4 hours to explore all this in full. But I was struck by some of the things that you said, because I agree completely that just as we are not given a roadmap when we arrive in the world as to how to find our purpose, I think there's also a very conflicted roadmap that's thrown in front of us, and indeed conflicting multiple roadmaps about what it means to be masculine or feminine or some combination of both, which of course everybody is some combination of both, just to varying degrees.
Well, yeah. So men have a feminine side to them, which if you try to repress it, will come out in other ways. And women have a masculine side to them. I think Jung described this very well with the anima and the animus, which I think is extremely real. It's very, very confusing times for both men and for women right now. We don't know the roles that they're everything is just so fluid, and it's very, very difficult, particularly if you're young. So young women are getting this idea that everything should be equal and that women should have, and of course it's right, should have be paid the same and should have the same career opportunities. There should be no prejudice or harassment or anything. But at the same time, on social media, it's all about looking perfect, and looks are incredibly important. And if you're not hot, you're in terrible trouble. And a lot of young girls are extremely confused by this. They're getting mixed signals, right? And boys are even in perhaps even worse circumstance where being masculine is seen as something negative. So we don't have any ideals out there anymore of what constitutes a good positive form of femininity and a good positive form of masculinity. In fact, we even think that there shouldn't be anything like that there's no such thing as being masculine or feminine or whatever. It's very, very confusing. And so, I think of masculine traits that I think are very positive and that should be out there to kind of counteract the sort of Andrew Tate seduction that a lot of young men are falling for. And it's a kind of an inner strength where you're sort of in control of your emotions. You're not invulnerable, et cetera, et cetera. But you can take criticism. You can take you can have moments of failure and you'll bounce back, but you have a kind of inner resilience and a kind of inner strength, a kind of a quiet calm that I think used to be exemplified in movie icons like a Gary Cooper type thing, right? And that kind of sense of inner calmness where you're not hysterical, you're not getting upset about everything that happens, where you have a kind of an inner strength and a confidence, and you can withstand kind of what Ryan Holiday talks about, a lot about with stoicism. You can withstand all of the hardships in life, but you have that citadel within you, is a very, very powerful form of masculinity, as opposed to it's all about sleeping with a lot of women, having really fast cars, being abusive and being a bully, et cetera, et cetera. These are signs of weakness, of insecurity. And to be masculine should be a sense of security and inner confidence and inner strength, right? And that's what we should venerate in our culture, and we should have icons like that, okay? It doesn't mean that there's no role for men who are not masculine or who have more of the feminine virtues. There's definitely a role for that. And, we see a lot of that in all sorts of arenas of life. And then there should be a positive model for women, where instead of their appearances being judged by their appearances and having to conform to the ideals of what's hot or not, it's about being incredibly powerful and competent and have expertise and being really successful in your career, and as opposed to being continually judged by your appearances, which is very damaging. So these are terrible times. I mean, I feel fortunate that I grew up in a time where there were these kind of models for me to go by. And I think of my father, who was a very quiet man, and he was He was just a middle-class salesman is basically what he was. He just sold for all his whole life. He sold chemical supplies for one company. But he was very dignified. He treated people well. He was very calm and very quiet, but he also was very empathetic. That was my role model for what I think is a good masculine energy. And I think a lot of people just don't have that, and they're very lost. And so I don't know what the answer is to that. I can't really produce that out of thin air, but I wish I could.
Well, certainly nowadays there are many more, let's say, examples and options of masculine and feminine qualities out there for observation because of social media and because of the internet. And as you pointed out before, a key feature to becoming a functional human being, especially nowadays, is learning what to ignore.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an interesting idea in the circles around nutrition and health that, never before in human history have human beings been able to access such a wide variety of foods that differ from what their ancestors ate. And I don't even mean ancient ancestors. I mean, if you grew up in the Bay Area, as I did in the 1970s and 80s, there were a few ethnic restaurants, but we ate the same, 15 or 20 foods over and over again.
Right.
And then eventually that exploded into dozens of options and more, and fusion foods and all sorts of things. And so there is this idea in the nutrition communities that we are not hardwired to think about and discern so many different food options and to taste so many distinct flavors, whereas before people in one portion of the planet or country ate generally one way in a given season, if there's seasonality, et cetera, et cetera. In a similar vein, we are now, and children too are now overwhelmed with a number of different options of how to express oneself, both masculinity and femininity, but generally speaking. And so the question is then, how does one choose? Right? How does one decide what's functional, what works, what's best, what's me, right? Everyone asking themselves, who am I, right? I think all teenagers, I find this fascinating, ask themselves, who am I? Adults don't tend to ask themselves that question,
right.
But who am I?
I still ask myself that
Okay,
question.
well, that's good. Maybe I should ask myself that more often. But I think that we clearly have gone over a cliff with this stuff. I don't think we're still at the point where we're kind of veering towards the edge of confusion. I think young people are really confused because the moment one assumes one clear and, let's say, balanced set of masculine, feminine attributes, or maybe veers a bit more masculine or a bit more feminine, it's like there are a million examples telling you that that's wrong.
I know.
And then sometimes has the tendency to anchor to, well, no, I'm right because this is who I am. And then all of a sudden you're in a larger battle. So